I'm holding it upside down, aren't I? It kind of got me out of my reading slump. This is actually a middle grade that is situated... Hello lovely bookworms, I'm Esmay from Paradise of Pages on Instagram and also on Twitter, and welcome to a new video. Today, as you can see from the title, I'm doing a wrap-up, and it's been a long time. I stopped doing monthly wrap-ups because I've been in such a weird reading mood where one month I would read 2 books and the other I would read 8, and it didn't really make sense for me to do wrap-ups, and so I thought I would introduce a new sort of idea, which is like recent wrap-ups, like a recent read wrap-up. So I think that's what I'm gonna call this video. Today I'm gonna talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books, I think. Yeah, 7 books, and some of them I've read in August, some of them I've read in September, so they're pretty recent, the last 2 months. For this one, I'm only talking about the books that I think are logical to talk about, because I've also read a couple for uni already, and those are just not, like, those are not books that I would review, so these are all just books I've read for me, if that makes sense. Though I also feel like you read books for uni for you, but, you know, whatever. I have some iced tea here in my cactus glass, so it's a little bit more laid back. I'm gonna actually try and talk about these books in a bit more depth, because I feel like I generally don't do that, so I'm gonna try to do that a lot more and talk about what I actually feel about books without spoiling. As for some of these books, some of them are sequels, some of them are not, so we'll just go through them. I would say, I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but I would say grab a snack, grab a drink, and yeah, let's start. So the first book I would like to talk about is the second book in the duology, and that is Ironheart by Nina Varela. This is the continuation of Crier's War, and I'm pretty sure this was one I've read in September. I'm not gonna keep saying that. If you really want to know when I've read these books, those links, those dates are all on my Goodreads, which is linked down below. So if you would really like to know, then it's down there, but honestly I can't remember. So this book is the continuation of Crier's War, and Crier's War follows 2, I wouldn't call them necessarily human. One of them follows, one of the main protagonists is an autome called Crier, and the other one is a human called Ayla, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. Yes, I remember correctly. And in this one, Ayla actually is part of the rebellion against the Autome, because they're in the Autome Empire, they're in the Autome period, I think they call it. Autome era, I'm pretty sure, because these Autome were created by humans, but they've evolved so much that they've taken control, and one of these Automes is out to destroy all of the humans. So it's quite a hectic story. And in this one, Crier actually wants better living situations for humans, and Ayla is out to avenge her family, who has been murdered brutally by the Autome. And in order to do that, she actually wants to hurt the king most, and her idea of hurting the king most is killing his daughter, who's Crier. Crier is the king's daughter. So that's basically where the story starts. Something I really loved about this is that it's such an interesting world that's been created by Nina Varela. It is also very strange to say Nina all the time, so I'm gonna just say Varela, I think, for now, or the author. What I also really enjoyed about this one was the inner conflict that, especially inside Ayla, is brewing, because as you can probably imagine, there is romance in here, and Ayla has such an internal struggle with who she is, her thoughts, her ideas, her feelings, everything that she stood for is sort of rattled to the core. And this book, Ironheart, immediately follows after the first one, Crier's War, and I think that these two match perfectly. I also really enjoyed the way in which this ended and the way in which they wrapped everything up. I feel like all storylines that have at one point been introduced have been wrapped up in such a nice way, and I think this duology is so full of meaningful relationships, situations, conversations, all that kinds of things, and it really makes you wonder who you are as a person, and I really enjoyed that. Sometimes I like having a book that's just a book that's fun to read, and sometimes there's a book that sort of hits with you differently, and I really enjoyed this duology, and I can safely say that I would definitely recommend it. So the next book is actually a small little audiobook that I've picked up, which I listen to on my way to work and back, because I have to be in a car for an hour every single day, so half an hour to and half an hour fro, if that makes sense. And so I usually try and pick out an audiobook, because that is actually an hour of listening, and considering I'm listening at 2 times speed, that's 2 hours of listening, so I'll fly through audiobooks. And the book I want to talk about is Crystal Ribbon, or The Crystal Ribbon. This is actually a middle grade that is situated in China, ancient China. And something I loved about this, and I do have to say I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I love the cultural representation that this book has. The main character that we follow, she deals with so many hardships, but looking at her and seeing the world through her eyes, and seeing all of the myths and legends that are in this book, and the culture itself, it's so vastly different from what I'm familiar with and what I've read, because it's, I don't know, I just find it very interesting to read about cultures that aren't my own, and I love learning things like this. And especially for middle grade, I feel like it's a very heavy middle grade. I would not compare this to A Pinch of Magic, for example. Pinch of Magic is a lot easier to comprehend. This one is very detailed, and at first I actually thought it was a young adult because of the mature content that is in here. I personally would not call this a middle grade, even though it's labeled as such, and our main protagonist I think is around the age of 13 or 14, like she's very young, so in that sense it's a middle grade. But I wouldn't necessarily give this to my kid like, hey, this is a fun story, go read it. So be cautious of that if you want your kid to read this. I do think that if you're looking for something Chinese inspired that you as yourself or your adult self or whatever would like to read, be mindful of some triggers in there. There's some abuse in here, but I think it was such an interesting read and I actually really enjoyed it. That said, I do have to say that the ending was a bit rushed for me. Would have liked a bit more of a sort of, I don't know, wrap around the story, because certain parts of the story have not been completed at the end of the book, and it is a standalone from what I remember, or from what I've known so far. Maybe there will be a sequel in the future, I don't know, but there are parts of the story that I'm still missing and would have liked. But other than that, really solid middle grade, and one of my absolute favorites, I think. So next up is a book that actually kind of got me out of my reading slump, and this could actually, I'm pretty sure this was August when I read this, and that is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. This is basically a collection of shorter stories that are all centered around the Norse gods, hence Norse mythology. Like, for example, the Mead of Poets, there's one, let's see, Freya's Unusual Wedding. What's another one called? The Children of Loki, for example. Like, these are all shorter stories, and I loved reading it. There were so many bits and pieces that really made me laugh, because I feel like myths in general, like mythology in general, especially also when you look at Greek mythology, there are a lot of things in there that are very fantastical, in the sense that they're very improbable, and certain things are just hilarious, especially when looking at Loki. I love his mischief. Loki's always been one of my favorite characters. Same goes for the MCU, even though that Loki is not near the Loki in actual Norse myths. But I love both. I love both. And I also loved seeing Thor and the way that he's so, like, it's almost as if he's brainless, and he's very brawny, and he's very able, like he's a very able-bodied god who can easily beat people up. But he's not always the smartest tool in the shed. No, sharpest tool in the shed. So, or the brightest crayon in the box. I mean, yeah, he's such a fun character, and I loved learning a bit more about Thor's brothers and the way in which the world works, and yeah, I think it was just a fun read. It was also a very quick read, and I think that if you want to learn a bit more about Norse myths without going into a textbook that's a bit more dry, I think this would be a good recommendation. I think a lot of people would enjoy this. Also, how beautiful is this gold spine? I'm holding it upside down, aren't I? Yes, I'm holding it upside down. There we go! But yeah, it's actually a really, really gorgeous book, and I loved reading it, and I'm pretty sure I will reread it at some point. So let's continue on to one of my new favorites. This is a book that I listened to for most of it, I'm pretty sure, if not all of it, and this book, it is no surprise this is a new favorite because this writer has only written favorites for me, and that is Blade of Secrets by Tricia Levenseller. I think this book, out of all of the books that she has written, is very special because we follow a main protagonist with severe social anxiety. So our main protagonist, Ziva, she is actually the one who has social anxiety. She works in the forge and she's a master at creating weapons and infusing them with magic. All of her pieces are personal and all of her pieces are special. They're one of a kind, and she loves metal over people. Her forge is her safe place, and the only person that she trusts in her life is her sister, and I'm pretty sure she was called Temra. This story was so interesting to read from front to back, because at some point in this book, Ziva is forced out of her forge, and she has to go on an adventure to save the world, basically. And does she want to? Absolutely not. She does not want to leave her forge, but in order to keep her sister safe and herself safe, she has to leave everything behind and run for the hills. And she does, together with her sister, who is everything Ziva is not, a social butterfly, and she's easy to make contact with, lovely personality and conversation, whereas Ziva just wants to disappear, be by herself, creating weapons. She also gets incredibly angry when they use her weapons as, how do you say it, like decorative pieces. She wants her craftsmanship to be used. And in general, I feel like Ziva is such an interesting main protagonist because usually our main protagonists are bold, they're brash, they are ready for battle, and they want to save the world, and Ziva is everything but. Ziva just wants to live a normal, regular, quiet life with her sister, creating weapons, being in her forge all day. She doesn't care about dresses, she doesn't care about makeup, she doesn't care if her hands get calloused. She just wants to be left alone, basically. And I thought it was so interesting to follow a character like this. And on top of that, I love the stories, I love the characters that are encountered. I cannot wait for the sequel to this. I'm pretty sure it's a duology, so the next book is coming out next year, and I'm pretty sure that is the sequel to this, and the finishing, so the final book in this duology, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I gave this one 5 stars, by the way. Not all the books I've read were 5 stars. Norse Mythology was 4, The Crystal Ribbon was also 4, and Ironheart was 5. I really loved Ironheart, but this was definitely 5-star plus. I would give it more if I could. This is one of my all-time favorites now, and I am already very tempted to reread it, but I can't, so I won't. But really, really, really good book, and it's also not that big, which is surprising because of how much was sort of squeezed in here. I really, really enjoyed it. Speaking of all-time favorites, this is a book whose duology, whose sequel, it's not a duology, I'm pretty sure it's a series. I've seen at least 3, maybe even 4 books. I think it's a trilogy now that I remember it. I think it's a trilogy, but I am not good at keeping track of that. But the book, the second book in this series is coming out this month, actually. I think on the 7th. And the first book I recently finished, and that is Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. This book, I actually got the Fairy Loot Special Edition because I thought I would love it, and it has not disappointed me. This book basically follows a part of a twin. We follow Amelia. I'm pretty sure her name is Amelia. Yes, Amelia, and she has a twin sister called Vittoria. Both of them come from a long line of witches, and they have magical abilities. And at some point, Vittoria gets brutally murdered, and Amelia is out for revenge. Amelia is usually the one who is a little more quiet, subdued, and she wants to just lead a regular life. She wants to cook because her family owns a restaurant, and she's very big into cooking, and she wants to one day take over the restaurant. But when her twin gets murdered, she is ready for violence. She wants to avenge her sister, find out who killed her and why. And so, in doing so, she starts researching the things that Vittoria did, because she was a bit more of the wild child, and she finds out a couple of things. And as she finds things out, she summons one of the 7 wicked, and she follows none other than Wrath. And Wrath is one of my absolute favorite characters. He really climbed the list, and he is sitting there up top with Dara from the City of Brass now. I love Wrath. He is amazing. He's savage. He is everything you would not want in a true live man, and everything I love in a fictional boyfriend. I don't know what it is. He's so much fun. And he doesn't claim to be righteous because he's definitely a demon. And he's just such a, I don't know, he was just such a fun character. And I loved the banter between Amelia and Wrath. Both of them are amazing. They're dynamic, or the way in which Carrie Maniscalco creates relationships and dynamics between characters is just always so interesting. I really loved the dynamic between Audrey Rose and Thomas in Stalking Jack the Ripper as well. That series is one of my absolute favorites. But this book did not disappoint, and I might actually love it more than Stalking Jack the Ripper. Not Hunting Prince Dracula, though. That one's still my all-time favorite. But this one is definitely 5 stars, 5 stars plus. Another all-time favorite. I've lately read a lot of new favorites, which is really, really nice. And I cannot recommend this one enough. Okay, so I have 2 more books to talk about, and this book is actually one that I expected a lot more from. And it's sad but true. In the end, I did give it 4 stars, I think, because of how much I loved the ending. However, the book I am talking about is 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. If you know me, you know that some of my absolute favorite books are by Elizabeth Lim, so the Spin the Dawn duology, Reflection, and there was another one. I don't remember. And this one is also Chinese inspired, I think. It is definitely high fantasy. But I did really enjoy it, especially the ending. I do have to say that when I went into this book, it felt very rushed, and our main protagonist, Shori, felt a little bit immature. And maybe that was the sense of this book, I'm not sure, because of the way that she does grow up and she does change as a person. But the way in which she handled things was a bit off-putting. That said, I did love the way in which this story, or the story sort of unfolded, because our main protagonist, Shori, has 6 brothers. And at one point she figures out that her stepmother is evil, and her stepmother changes her into, she basically gets this pot on top of her head that's like covering, I'm not sure if it's covering her eyes, but she has this bowl on her head. And her brothers are turned into cranes, hence the title 6 Crimson Cranes. And then basically she is forced to never speak again, because her curse is that if she ever makes a sound, whether that is a laugh, a cry, or an uttering, one of her brothers will die. So she is forced to remain quiet, and nobody knows who she is because of this bowl on top of her head. And she is forced to flee her kingdom, and so she is out to avenge her brothers and herself, basically, and defeat her mother-in-law. And the way in which the story goes is just, it's so much fun. I had a lot of fun reading it, I have to say that. And there's also a dragon in here who is amazing. I really, really enjoyed him. and the story itself was very refreshing. It's very renewing, and I loved the culture that's in this book. I'm not sure if it's culturally accurate, but considering I think this is Elizabeth Lim's own culture, I would be surprised if it weren't. That said, I feel like it's also part of the culture that she's just created in this fictional world, so it's a bit of both. And the story itself was just very creative. I loved the way that this went. Also, I cannot wait to see how this will continue, because this book basically ended in such, it's not necessarily a huge cliffhanger, but it's such an open ending that I cannot wait to see how certain things will change and progress, because there's still things that have to be resolved. I'm not gonna spoil anything. And I just, in general, really, really enjoyed it. I did give it 4 stars though, because the beginning, I think the first half of this book it felt rushed for me, and I wasn't really enjoying it as much as I would have wanted to, but the second half of that really made up for it, so it went from 3 to 4 stars, but not 5 stars, so that's this one. Then I have one more book to talk about, which has already been discussed on this channel, but I do want to quickly mention it, and that is the finishing book and the final book in the Ember in the Ashes series. It's over. This is the final book. No more of this world, which I'm sad about, but also okay with. So I'm talking about A Sky Beyond the Storm by Saba Tahir. This is the 4th book in the Ember Quartet and the final book, hence why it's a quartet. We follow in this one Laia and Elias, who are basically opposing. Laia wants to save her brother. Elias wants to flee from the Empire, where he's supposed to become a soldier. And then we get sort of second characters. So we get Helena, who is not a main character in the first book, but is one in the second book. And we get some other side characters. We actually get a lot of side characters as you go through the stories, because, I mean, the book is huge. The second and the third one are also huge, so lots of characters. This book, I loved up until the ending, actually. There's a couple of things that happen in this book, which I'm not gonna disclose. If you want to know, you can still rewatch the live show that we did on this, because I am very vocal there. That, like, these certain events that have happened, I don't enjoy. And that's why I gave this book 4 stars and not 5. The ending to this also, like, on the one hand is what I wanted, and on the other hand is not even close to what I wanted, which was pretty disappointing for me, at least, because certain things were just, I feel like they were a bit rushed and sort of left out, and I would have liked a bit more of that. Nonetheless, I think it was a solid book. I love the series as a whole, and I think it's still one of my absolute favorites. I will forever love the first book, but I feel like I loved them a lot more the first time that I read them. But I can definitely recommend the series, and I feel like it's very, very original, and I love the characters still. Laia, Elias, and Helena are my babies. I love them to death, and I'm actually quite sad that I'll never read anything new about them, or at least I don't think we'll get anything ever anymore. But yeah, this is still one of my favorite series. So those were the books that I've sort of recently read. It's not a ton. I've been in a bit of a funk with my reading, and I hope that I can pick it up soon again. That said, I hope that you've enjoyed this new sort of format. I have tried to actually go into the book and tell you what I liked about them without spoiling them, which I hope I've succeeded at. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and press the little bell icon so you can post notifications every single time that we post a video. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye!